Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Silver Linings in COVID-19, a fireside chat with industry leaders. The webinar will start in a moment. However, I would like to share some housekeeping information with you all. We expect this webinar to be very interactive. It will be in the format of a discussion panel, so we kindly invite you to ask your questions in the question panel as the discussion is ongoing. And these questions will be addressed by the moderator throughout the webinar. My name is Shreya and I'm the SCDM Education Coordinator. I am pleased to introduce to you today Sanjay Bhardwaj, who is the Executive Director and Head of Clinical Data Management of Allergan AbbVie and Vice Chair of SCDM. Mikhail Guda, who is the Vice President at PRA Health Sciences and SCDM's Chair, followed by Patrick Nadolny, who is the Global Head in Clinical Data Management and Programming of Allergan AbbVie, as well as SCDM Advisor and Chair of the Innovation Committee. And last but not least, Demetrios Zambas, who is the Global Head in Data Monitoring and Management at Pfizer, and also a member of SCDM Advisor Board. And now, without taking too much of your time, I would like to introduce to you this webinar's moderator. Sanjay, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this third of our webinar on COVID-19. Today's topic, as was mentioned, is intended to be an interactive conversation, allowing you to get a sense of how some of the industry leaders are dealing with COVID-19 in their organizations, as well as what they're looking forward as we come back from COVID-19. So again, my name is Sanjay Bhardwaj. I work at AbbVie and I'm also the Vice Chair of the Board at SCDM. So I'll be a host for today. Next slide. Okay, so we have run these webinar, and this is our third of the COVID-19, and we have had great success on these. And hopefully today's participant numbers will further add to the tally of more than 900 people that have attended the last two events. So let's begin. Can you move to the next slide, please? Okay, so COVID-19 has certainly upended the way of life for all of us. This slide from McKinsey, the recent publication, to me, clearly underscores the extent of the impact COVID-19 has had on biopharma R&D. If you look at the year-over-year comparison, March 2019 to 2020, it shows a 65% decrease in new patients entering clinical trials per site. Half of the biotechs surveyed out of more than 100 indicated delays or cancellation of new projects. About 90 biopharma companies reporting disruption, and more than 4,000 late-phase studies, with majority of their sites, those studies were occurring in fully locked down areas. Can you build on this slide? Can you click one more? Thank you. And I think this is, to me, I guess, another shocking statistics which came in from the clinicaltrials.gov, that more than 1,000 trials explicitly stated or cited COVID-19 as the reason for being either terminated, suspended, or withdrawn. So let's face it, while some lockdowns are eased, COVID-19 is still with us, and there are many people getting infected every day. The disruption is real and personal to so many of us. So today's webinar conversation is certainly not intended to look past that fact. Instead, recognizing and appreciating what COVID-19 has done, and to build on what we have learned and what learnings do we carry forward from this experience we have all had, and how the clinical data management profession and all of you and us, how will we be operating in the future learning from COVID-19? So next slide, please. So our topic for today is silver lining in COVID-19, and we'll be discussing some of those with our industry thought leaders that are here today. Some logistics, I know it was mentioned that it's an interactive dialogue. The way I envision for us to work in the next hour and a half or so is that, one, I'll provide some context on some discussion topics, and I'll ask some questions to our panelists. for them to weigh in. They're going to have 2 active polls during this presentation, so I hope all of you participate in those polls. And finally, and I think most importantly, as we go along, if you have any thoughts or questions as we discuss some of this material, please put your comments or questions in the chat window. We'll monitor the comments as they come in, and we'll try to weave those into the discussion. And there will be a section towards the tail end where we will also take on audience questions. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to be presenting to you our panelists who were previously introduced, so I won't go through the introductions again, but can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, I guess they were introduced. Who, by the way, who doesn't know Dimitri? And he's a known voice for our discipline for more than 2 decades, and both with the regulatory agencies as well as through the industry channels. He's currently the VP of and the global head of DMM, data management and monitoring at Pfizer, and involved in some really exciting stuff with artificial intelligence and machine learning. With potential to transform how data is reviewed, and I think his learnings from or what we all will get to learn how Pfizer is utilizing machine learning. I think would be very useful to all of us. Patrick is a visionary. I've worked with Patrick for long, a brain and driver behind our SCDM Innovation Committee, and he chairs that committee. And last but not the least, my friend Mikhail is the current chair of the board at SCDM, and obviously the vice president of GDO, the Global Data Operations for one of the premier global CRO, PRA Health Sciences. So thank you and welcome everyone, and thank you for giving us your valuable time, panelists, to be on this webinar. So let's dive in. Next slide. So let me set the context, as I said, and some categories that I had in my mind to shape this webinar and put some, I guess, building blocks. Again, this is not how, if there are some interactions that we're going to have, I guess, through your comments and questions, and I'm going to see that we make it as interactive for you. So I would not be the ones doing all the talk, okay? I promise you that. The challenges COVID-19 has posed are very well known, right? So there have not just been our clinical trials. I shared some statistics from McKinsey, but also how data management as function as an organization in your respective company operates globally, and the impact COVID-19 has had on whether through the lockdowns or the work from home measures. So I've listed on the right-hand side on the screen 3 buckets or the silver linings in here. Again, to initiate the dialogue doesn't mean these are all it, but thought of starting with these. So let me start, and I'll pose this question. Obviously, there has been a ton of COVID-19 impact, and I have personally experienced how my team has had to work at Allergan, AbbVie. But let me start by asking, Mikhail, how are your teams working through COVID-19? Can you give us a sense of what's changed in your organization's operations globally as you saw COVID-19 sprung up, given that all of your organizations, all 3 of you, are global in nature? So how did your teams deal with it? So we'll start with Mikhail, and then we'll move with Patrick, and then with Dimitri.
Well, thank you, Sanjay, and I'm going to focus in my answer more on the operational aspects of leading a global group on dealing with COVID overall. The Global Data Operations organization that I'm leading, we have offices and employees all over the world. We have them in China, we have them in India, Europe, and North America. And based on how COVID came along, there was definitely a timetable to it on how we had to adjust and learn on what was going on around the world with COVID and its spread as well. So there was definitely a learning on how we were able then to adjust in Europe and later on in the Americas. It didn't happen at the same time because COVID didn't happen at the same time globally as well. The obvious one is that we moved to a work from home environment relatively quickly, closing our offices as we had to due to local regulations and laws as well. And it brought, of course, some challenges that I think are not unique to our industry when people were stuck at home with their families. From our perspective, I should emphasize there was definitely a focus on highest priorities, keeping our employees safe. So first of all, it was making sure that you are in a safe environment. So the focus was not really on, do you have a laptop? Is your IT equipment there? That was a second thought. So first of all, make sure that you're good, that your family is good. And when that priority was met and there was a clear directive by our senior leadership, then we thought about IT equipment, how to connect, how do we deal with clients. Again, on this panel, I represent the service providers, the CRO industry. And as you can imagine, clients also approach us with different kind of requests and ways to engage with them. I would say that we adapted pretty quickly to the virtual environment. About half of our workforce was working from home anyway, so not too new for them. But the other half, of course, had to adjust from it. Overall, after I think a learning curve and getting used to it, we started to see some efficiencies, in fact, working from home. After, again, all family matters were being addressed, safety first. And now we're at the stage where we are seeing in some regions, and interesting enough, China first, where my staff in China is returning back to the offices. And in select places, we are, again, adhering to local requirements as well, with safety precautions going back to this office environment. Having said that, I'm going to close my answer with that statement, is that we are, of course, exploring the option and the benefits of a more virtual work environment as well, as, again, there seem to be many benefits. So it puts a question mark behind our traditional office environment.
Yeah. And Mikhail, we'll get to that also as we look into the future and how COVID-19 will shape how we work and operate in the future. But great. Patrick and Dimitri, let's go in that order.
Okay.
Patrick, with you first.
Okay. Yes, likewise, we all went through a work from home model at AbbVie. So Allergan Legacy, we did not have many people working from home. So path protecting employee safety first, of course. So we have to send everybody home, and not everybody was doing that. So what we observed, as you mentioned, Michael, is we even see an increase in productivity, and we didn't see any impact on data quality. So I can share one interesting different flavor compared to Mikhail is we work at AbbVie with an FSP partner in India. And this partnership was based on low-cost resources using shared computers, and they had to go to a facility every day. So when the lockdown in India happened, we had something like between AbbVie and Allergan 400 employees covering 80+% of our activities out of commission. So coming from 80% to lost to having everybody back was quite a learning curve. So now we have been able to implement a work from home strategy in India as well, actually. And it was quite an interesting model. And we are seeing that we have proven that the model works, and we expect it to continue moving forward. So in addition to that, we have seen that we have observed a lot of changes into our processes and our technologies. So there has been a steep learning curve from our employees to learn what a decentralized clinical trial is, what it means to not having a monitor going to the site. So it has been very steep, but very fruitful at the end of the day. I believe we become more efficient. And the learning we have taken from COVID-19 will carry on, and we'll discuss about it, I'm guessing, later. Sanjay.
Thanks, Patrick. Dimitri, given how global and the size of your organization is, and I think as Mikhail said, the COVID-19 didn't pan out all at once in all places. So how did it affect your workforce and your organization?
Yeah, I mean, as far as more kind of technologies and capabilities, we'll save it for the subsequent questions. But I want to go back to the point that Mikhail started with, which I think was the most critical, is everyone safe? Is everyone accounted for? It happened rather quickly. And we have a sizable team in Wuhan. I actually was just visited with them before all of this began. So in the first few days and weeks, it was really more a concern to make sure all of our staff accounted for. There were staff on vacation that then couldn't get back to their base, their home, because when travel restrictions started to be applied. So once we assured everybody was accounted for, everybody was safe, then we moved on to can they work? And for the most part, we do leverage remote working. So it wasn't anything new for anyone that required kind of basic training on how to work from home. All of our staff had laptops. Now, of course, the ones that were on vacation when the office was locked had to figure out a way. There were some interesting little nuances, but at the end of the day, I think the team very quickly and effectively transitioned to remote working. And if anything, we saw an uptick in productivity, not really any kind of negative impact. And the same with our partners. So we have multiple partners around the world. It was a little bit of an eye-opening if you think back when a lot of these different partner scenarios arose over the last few decades. There was a lot of focus about the hardware and the USB slots being blocked, that it had to be a desktop, not a laptop, so someone couldn't take all the data and run away with it. But today, it's all in the cloud. So all of those things kind of are not relevant anymore. And we came through that experiences where some partners didn't have laptops and had to quickly, I mean, to their credit, they responded and reacted very quickly. We never really saw an impact on deliverables or performance or work, but very quickly the whole department globally, including our partners, became a mobile remote unit. As you can see behind me, all of us shifted our work setting quite significantly.
Yeah. No, I think it's really telling. You know, some of the hesitations I know in certain organizations for people being able to work from anywhere, and I know our leaders in AbbVie, you know, it's a location agnostic type of work that we do, and you can be anywhere. So, okay, great, thank you all. So on this slide for the audience, as I said, I've bucketed the conversation in the three areas. So, and I call them three separate silver linings. One is the acceleration of adoption of new tech or the new sites of processes in how we conduct our clinical trial. And you learned it, you saw it in our prior webinars, how this 14 or 15 different companies that we surveyed as part of SCDM, how they adopted to the changing world. The second part of, I think, what I consider one of the silver lining is the risk-based data management. I know we keep saying that term in our meetings and whatnot, but risk assessment and contingency planning and being able to, obviously nobody could foresee a disruption like COVID-19, but when it comes to risk-based data management, given the data that we are all collecting, what is most critical? So I think there is a momentum in that direction that I think COVID-19 has definitely underscored. And lastly, I think there are learnings from COVID-19, and then we would again speak today and talk to the panelists about how they are taking this and building their organization and how COVID-19 has impacted those medium and long-term strategic plans that they may have. So those are the three areas that, again, I would chat next. So next slide, please. Okay. So I'm sure all of us noticed a ton of industry interest in tech interventions to manage how COVID-19 was impacting our studies, right? So whether it's adoption of decentralized trial platform, increase in collecting data remotely or more digitally. And some of these were not new. These technologies were being used in those studies, but I think some were new things that the organizations added. And then the last thing was around virtual visits and the types of process, such as even the lab sample collection or IP distribution. Those required changes in not necessarily just the tech part of it, but also the process of shipping the drugs. And given the unprecedented nature of the situation, the flexibility our regulatory agencies have also shown, I mean, the way I see is many organizations that were thinking about implementing these techs as let's run this pilot, I think they've just jumped into the water with both of their feet, which is, by the way, great. I mean, we do see a forever piloting sort of mindset in some organizations because these techs are evolving, and evolving very rapidly. But I do wonder, again, seeing it from my perspective, how much of this immediate deployment of tech that the organizations has had the time to think about how the data is getting collected and how are we going to flow this data ultimately for it to be used when it comes to clinical data management. So let's do a poll to see if our audience also saw that their organization adopt tech or processes at a faster pace than normal due to COVID-19. So can we run the poll now? So select yes, no, or if you do not know if your organization did adopt the processes with a faster pace than normal. Okay, you're going to give a few more seconds. Okay, Trafeen, let's see if everybody has voted. Let's see. Okay. Wow. Oh, not surprising. Not surprising. Almost 70% of you have said that your organizations did adopt tech or process changes at a much faster pace than normal. Dimitri, do you think COVID-19 has given the kind of push that was essentially needed to move past these kind of piloting? Let's start with you, and I would like Mikhail also to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think without question.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think without question. And it's not really that things came out of the sky. It's things that organizations have been, especially our organization, was already contemplating, was already piloting, doing proof of concepts. And there was this kind of really long, stretched out, staged implementation. And when you look at the options in front of you and you say, well, can we still do all this and get the information we need on time, whether it was a reporting acceleration or to your point earlier about risk-based monitoring, it really pushed the envelope in the sense of leveraging the tools instead of finding completely new tools that had never been tested or proven. Looking at things that we were already evaluating or piloting and saying, why are we waiting for this? This can make a difference, and really accelerating the implementation of it. So yes, I think it had a very positive impact in accelerating some of those capabilities.
To build on what Dimitri said, absolutely it accelerated it. I mean, the poll is showing it as well. One thought when I saw the poll numbers and the slide and the question here is, for those who saw the keynote of our Baltimore conference last year with Ken Turkey, his main takeaway is that we as an industry, and by the way, that was before COVID, his main takeaway as an industry is that we cannot afford anymore the cost and the time it takes us to find the right patient. So his key message was going e-source, going mobile, going virtual, going to the patients and pushing those kinds of technologies. That should have been enough incentive. And by the way, and again, I don't want to go into a direction where it's like, we told you so, but we did. I mean, since how many years, and I see Dimitri smiling, have we talked about the technologies? And in fact, I have to give a lot of credit to Dimitri with his organization and the hackathons and showing what can be done in a more virtual and technology environment. It shouldn't have to be up to COVID to push us into that direction here. But if there's something positive coming out of COVID, it's definitely that we will see an acceleration. We already did. I mean, look at our regulatory agencies and friends there, how they are turning things around. Even the most conservative corporations right now, and conservative is not a bad word, by the way. I mean, doing things the right way, doing it in a planned way, are now embracing those ones because they see they have to. Just from a contingency plan perspective, we don't know what the next issue will be that will prevent on patients going to a clinical site, for example, or other areas that we can't even imagine, where having direct access to e-source will definitely make the pain that you go through the conduct of a clinical study much easier. So yes, a long yes to your question, Sanjay, in terms of accelerating it.
Yeah, and Patrick, I mean, I think if you can weave into your response, I think the work that the Innovation Committee has been doing and the white papers that I know we all participated and contributed to in terms of digital trials and the recent tech paper. So if you could just weave into that I guess the thought leadership that SCDM was putting out there, that'd be great too.
Okay, yeah. No, I think first of all, I would like to echo what Mikhail and Dimitri said. I think the fear of decentralized clinical trial vanished with COVID-19. In many organizations prior to COVID, it was, yes, we're going to do it, but we have to do it the right way. We have to change the processes. We expected it to be like a couple of years out, but now it's happening today. And when we talk within our organization, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere, we expect it to continue after COVID-19. We don't expect it to be a one-off event. So we made the leap and we expect it to continue. On that, as you said, Mikhail, one of the positives of COVID-19. So when it comes to the evolution of our discipline, and I know we mentioned decentralized clinical trial technology a lot in our reflection paper on the evolution of clinical data management to clinical data science. We thought it's going to take a while, but we're seeing COVID-19 accelerating the trend, which is fantastic. So I think we're seeing virtual visits, so telemedicine, home nursing, capture of data through e-source, shipment of the IP to patients. So there's a lot of changes happening all at the same time. And at the beginning, all of those changes lined up very nicely with how we expected the industry to evolve. And the good news for us is, on the slide you showed prior, a lot of the technologies you mentioned and you showed in your slide, they are not new. A lot have been used and tested mainly on late-stage phase 4 studies. We didn't get the guts to make it happen on phase 3 and mainstream, but now I see that momentum building, and it's exciting for clinical data management in general. I'm seeing a lot of excitement actually in our organization, seeing decentralized clinical trial, risk-based data management, the scale-up of centralized monitoring. It's really putting a strong light toward data-driven approaches on the fact that we cannot rely anymore on on-site monitoring. It's clear. The end of on-site monitoring is in sight. And we need that, but more from an interaction from the site. But most of the activities traditionally conducted on-site, I think, will be transitioned much faster moving forward to a decentralized through central monitoring activities and through technologies. Sanjay.
Yep. Well, Trifine, can you move the slide back to the topic and not the poll question? Yeah, thank you. So obviously COVID-19 gave the push that was needed, and I think we do see in some of the actually the next slide, the one that you were showing before, Trifine. Yes, yeah, this one. Thank you. But why do you think we needed something like COVID to push us? I mean, is there something within our I know we're not, our organizations and our industry doesn't make widgets. I mean, we talk about patients' lives and whatnot. So we need to ensure that the texts we are implementing are validated and we are regulated in quite a different ways. But why do you think we needed COVID-19 to push us?
Risk benefit.
Whoever wants to take it.
Risk benefit. So in anything, whether we think of it as risk benefit, we all think of risk benefit. I think it's how the brain works. And we have all of these things that are options for study teams to take advantage of. But in many cases, there's options that we need because of different scientific factors or socioeconomic, whatever. There's many options in how you set up a study that are appropriate and necessary, and there's ones that are not. And there's preferences there based on just historical preference. I mean, even the silliest things, units that people look at lab values at, and you have a team saying they want all reports in a certain unit because that's where the MD leading the team went to medical school, preferred that unit versus this unit. All kinds of things that are out there that are they don't need to be options versus things that viably need to be options. An example might be risk-based monitoring. So we have pretty significant implementation of it in our organization, but there were still many resistant teams that were kind of having discussions, trying to demonstrate the risk benefit of the approach. Well, guess what? When you can't visit a site anymore, the risk of not doing it all of a sudden grew logarithmically. So now even that perceived risk of doing it, which risk-based monitoring is all about reducing risk, but still to some people it's a perceived risk of doing it. Now all of a sudden the risk of not doing it just exploded.
Right.
And the result is our RBM team now has a queue of studies waiting to get RBM support, as opposed to us trying to convince them to come into an RBM setting. So, I mean, that's just one example. I think Patrick spoke to the virtual examples where, again, similar scenario. I think time will tell what the right balance of the virtual space is. I'm not sure it's one of those things that's going to solve all of our problems, but certainly considering it and implementing it where appropriate, all of a sudden came to the front page instead of being something teams to potentially consider.
Yeah, so giving people options versus, hey, you must do, otherwise your study is not going to proceed forward. So I think that was definitely there was an aspect to it too. So Patrick, you want to weigh in too, and Mikhail?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I agree with you, Dimitri. It forced us to look into what matters. Before we wanted everything, but now people are realizing you need to focus on what matters. And to jump on what you said, Mikhail, at the beginning, we focused on employee safety. In that case, we had to focus on patient safety first. So when you had patients in ongoing studies and they couldn't visit sites anymore, and they were locked down, we still had to make sure they were safe. If there were acute treatment required, we needed to ship treatment to them. So it kind of forced us to use different ways to keep them safe and keep the studies going. So we had no other choice, and it made people realize that it can be done. And I think it was one for us, I'm not sure for everybody, and if you see the regulator, patient safety first, make sure you protect your patient. And that was the humongous driver to force everybody to implement a new strategy. You have no choice. You had to do it. And in that front, medical monitoring, on-site monitoring, clinical development, everybody had to weigh in and protect the patient. And that united everybody and forced everybody to find the right solution. I think that was one of the key drivers, I believe. One of them.
I can add two items to this, and one, maybe Dimitris, you can maybe round it up for me. In your question, Sanjay, you mentioned maybe as a reason the regulatory environment, why we were not so quick on it. And I've heard this argument since decades now, even going all the way back when we were talking about EDC and what regulators might say about it. I think that on this discussion, we should demystify that or get rid of that myth. It's not the regulators standing in our way. In fact, and again, Dimitris, I think you're the closest one from the four of us to the regulatory body across the globe. I usually see them as true supporters, even pushing the industry, asking for solutions. And yes, it's true that in whatever organization I worked for, sometimes it's, well, from a regular perspective, it's if it's not clear, and that's then an argument being used, but I would reject that one. And before, again, passing to Dimitris on that question to maybe have a word on the regulatory part, another truth, I think, is that in the whole, let's call it e-source virtual environment, I want to postulate here is that we're not really good at it yet. So for example, if you want to do EHR in a given study, but you still have an EDC component, and then you have all those integrations and the standards that you have to use, and what in a global study. So when we, as whatever company, be it sponsor, be it CRO, approach clients, and we paint them one of those horrific slides with 10 different systems and all the integrations, me being an advocate for it, I'm scared about it, but not from a regulatory environment, just from how complicated this looks. So I think that we as an industry have to do a better job to truly show the benefits, simplified. I don't want to say dumb it down, it's a reality, but we have to get better at it so that it becomes a no-brainer in addition to everything that's going on that people want to jump on it. But again, back to you, Dimitris, regulatory is not staying our way.
Yeah, I could not agree more, Mikan. Every time I've had a discussion with any of our regulatory friends, it's always been not don't do this or whatever, but really clarifying caveats to be cautious of, to make sure that you're still to ensure you're still following the spirit of the regulation. And if you think about, we get caught up on these little nuances all the time. What's the primary directive of a regulatory body is to protect human safety, and sometimes we lose sight of that. We get into such minutia nuance that really, with some very minor caveats, you're not even remotely within a mile of affecting human safety, but yet we spend hours and have conferences and meetings about some of these nuances. I think it's our fear of that. That really keeps us from progressing even more and at a higher speed. I don't think the regulators are there to stand in the way. I think that they're more to advise us in these scenarios. They're even with the hackathon thing that Miguel mentioned earlier with the machine learning. When we met with the regulators, they say, don't do it. We're scared. It's weird. Stop. They said, well, you should consider, because traditional validations may not apply always, you should consider a learning curriculum and storing what you've taught this tool the way you would a training record for a human. Okay, that's very useful, valid feedback from a regulatory body, not do and don't, but as one would expect. It's more, expanded guidance on the topic.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with both of you and all of you in terms of the agencies are there to support us. So I think it's that perspective that we see and hear versus the kind of inertia people show. I mean, talk about, ECO and BYOD. I mean, everybody is carrying their phone. I mean, some of it seemed to be, okay, not every questionnaire, there are certain things validated in a certain way, but for people to have been talking about BYOD for such a long period of time, and it's just, I think you guys nailed it. I think it's a bit of inertia. It's not some of these agencies that are kind of saying, no, don't do that. I think as long as you put the right set of plans, and I think they're more interested in going more digitally, and I think their position papers are showing that. So great. Well, I would like to move the conversation to more inward in terms of data management. Well, COVID-19 has had impact differently, but I think there are many different organizations that are now working on clinical trials for COVID. So whether it comes to the vaccines, I know Dimitri, Pfizer has been in the news. So is Johnson and Johnson, Moderna, and there are like number of companies who are really jumped in and really pursuing a solution here. And when we are running some of these studies, I have heard, and I think I've spoken to people, that the remarkable speed that companies and data management functions have adopted, even using current sets of technologies and processes, that DM is able to deploy EDC for some of these studies in mere few days. I mean, it shows that we can be fast when needed. So I'd like you guys to weigh in on, have you seen, I know you have, but have you seen anything like that in your respective organization? And Dimitri, especially given Pfizer's vaccine development plans, do you want to weigh in on this, starting with you, and then we'll go to Patrick and then Mikhail?
Yeah, well, necessity is the mother of invention, right? The old saying. But I mean, there's really no reason other than making sure. I mean, obviously, there's a reason for making sure certain validated approaches are taken, but there's no reason it takes as long as it does in our traditional studies startup processes. This particular scenario obviously was self-motivating for so many people, right? And we had that call. You may have seen those articles on LinkedIn and in Forbes with our CEO saying, "No, the sky's the limit. No, don't tell me there's a cost issue. Don't tell me, just make it happen," kind. Which was quite the motivating thing for the whole organization to hear. We had people from other therapeutic areas volunteer to take work off of the vaccine people's plates so they could focus more of their time on setting up and starting up the COVID vaccine trial. So, and it was really just humbling to see the whole organization move forward. Specifically with the startup, really, it's as simple as iterative prototyping. So there's a group writing a protocol. There's a group building a database. Why do you need till the protocol is done and the specs are done from that protocol to then build a database? There's no reason you couldn't do it iteratively. Of course, that means team alignment. It means good team communications. It means disciplined decision making, so you're not constantly changing everything and making destructive changes to your database every second day. But because of that, literally, and there's some SOPs that are very critical, right? There's the ones that allow you some flexibility, and there's some that say, you know what, this is SDLC, you can't violate this for obvious reasons. So in the particular case of the COVID trial, we were able to take the study into UAT the afternoon of the morning of the same day that the protocol was signed in the morning. And within a couple of days, it went from finalization of protocol to production. And definitely beating the prior record by a log. But no process was changed. No process was violated. No regulation or SDLC principles were violated. It was just a matter of the team communicating and doing the right pre-work. Right. Which is definitely something, yeah, of course, you don't want people working nights and weekends every single time. For this, everybody wanted to. But even under normal circumstances, normal work hours, and you look at how it was feasible, it still would be dramatically reduced timeframes from what we're normally accustomed to. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean in every scenario, that's building a database. It doesn't mean in every scenario, if you get a database in a week, somehow you magically have IP and you magically have ethical committee and RV approvals and you have informed consent. In this case, the whole system moved. Even the responses from the regulators were incredible. The whole system moved to make it happen fast because it was a public need.
Right. Yeah. I think we'll touch back upon this when we go to looking forward. I think there must have been a lot of learnings, whether it's the iterative development approaches that without sky's the limit in terms of the cost perspective. I mean, there's an aspect of that. Like, do you apply these strategies across the board? And sometimes it's not, the EDC database is not available. There are other aspects of clinical trial whether it's the drugs that's available for at the time of beginning of the study. So, but I think there's definitely learning there. So, Patrick, how about you? And then we'll go to Mikkel.
No, yeah. Thanks, Andrea. And I think in our case, we did not have to initiate a COVID-19 related study. But what happened is really the situation with COVID-19 really united everybody. So I can give you an example of that. Is we had we have hundreds of ongoing clinical trials, and when we needed to have a strategy to oversee the impact of COVID-19 on those ongoing studies, so we were able almost in a week to agree on what would be the centralized data monitoring strategy. And we were able to, as a team, to identify the top critical study with the highest safety concerns. And we were able to agree across like all TAs in less than a week on one standard approach to deal with it. So I think it was really being able to rally everybody around one need and get consensus. And I believe the fact that we needed to protect patient safety, the need that we needed to act fast, kind of foster collaborations on standardization. And we didn't see that before. Before, each study team wanted a nuance. My study is unique. That disappeared with COVID. All the nuances across clinical studies vanished. So to us, right. What makes sense? What do we need to do? Find a solution. And to your point, Dimitri, there were no limit to what we could do. As long as we stayed into the process and regulations, the flexibility was there. So we were able to implement a statistically based monitoring strategy at a speed we have never seen before. And that was more risk-based. We had 2 studies in POCs. Now we have all studies using it now, all critical studies, just in a matter of months. It would have taken us 2 years to get there, but now it's done in 2 months. So on this, that motivation on that one goal that united us to deliver that.
The one part that I can add to it, and maybe again representing the service providers, the CRO industry, is one of the not just perceived benefits, but actual benefits working for CRO is that you're exposed to, in our case, hundreds of clients. So what I did find fascinating around those ones, and obviously those clients will remain nameless here, where we had clients, and I have to say, and not just for our company, this is not a pitch for POA, but other companies as well, we have the luxury to sit on a very sophisticated mobile health platform just on around the onset of COVID, when COVID was not where it is today. We had launched the first fully virtual study in the industry. So we have and had a certain track record, and we had a certain environment. What was fascinating is that, of course, we tried to work with our clients to deploy those ones. And you could see clients prior to COVID really resistant for all the different reasons out there, sometimes even valid ones. How some of those clients changed their mindset so quickly on something like that. Again, they might needed this little push from COVID to go in that direction. Then, of course, there was an influx of truly COVID-related studies where, again, all of the biotechs out there trying to get on a cure, vaccine on accelerated timeline, huge competition going on as usual, maybe even more right now, because you would go into the history if you're the first one coming up with a cure. So those timelines were great. So again, I felt, other than, of course, COVID overall is a very unfortunate situation, but I did feel fortunate to currently work in an environment being exposed to so many different approaches, so many different opinions on how to deploy technology. And the good thing is, honestly, having more often than not solutions to offer to those clients what we can do. And we talk a lot about technology, and Sanjay, you know me, there is usually no talk without me. It's going beyond technology and talking about at least one soft skill. And if there were any people from my group on this call, they might roll their eyes right now, because I use the word pragmatism or being pragmatic quite often overall. If this is not the time to being pragmatic within reason, as Dimitri said, like you still respect the regulatory environment, still do the right thing, take patient safety into mind, I don't know what time you have to be. This is where, as a lead data manager, as any data scientist professional, of course you have to think beyond EDC. Otherwise you're lost in our industry right now, and even for those skeptics, we're now being pushed in this relationship. So again, I felt within the overall, of course, negative environment of COVID, quite fortunate to be able to engage with so many clients on so many different levels, have solutions for them, and continue to push pragmatic approaches that make sense. So I think this is how we took it, and are still honestly still taking it.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, there are some questions streaming in, and I want to thank for folks who've asked those questions. I've tried to weave one or two in the discussions we've just had, and I'll try to do more of that. If we don't get a time to do it right now, we'll have a time towards the end, ensuring that we are able to cover the three pieces that I talked about earlier. But there are some questions, and there are some really interesting ones, right? I mean, we talked about EDC, but I think there are wearables or doing remote SDVs. Some of the current sets of technology or a platform won't allow things to just fall in place. So I think there is an aspect of integrating those systems in your ecosystem, or being able to change processes, right? So the monitors aren't able to go to the sites and do the SDV. How are they able to do whatever they are able to do remotely, right? So technologies around that, or the process changes. Now, we need to just keep in mind is in many of these cases, patients weren't able to get to the sites and complete the visit. So the source wasn't getting generated either. So I think in some of those cases where the data entry happens as close to the patient's visit, I think this was less of an issue. But yeah, obviously, if you have areas where the SDV needs to get done, and there are remote monitors who are looking at it, how do you scan some of those things for people to see, and how do you protect, some of the PII that now is going through a scanning system to a monitor. So again, similar questions are coming in, and we'll come to some of that towards the tail end. I would like to move on to our next slide, which talks about, I think, some of our risk-based approaches. So silver lining number two. I guess to me, this is kind of going back to the basics. I mean, while we all agree not all data we collect is equal, but in its importance to the submission, but we still collect quite a bit of data, right? And when we asked this question at our last webinar, almost 3/4 of the attendees said that they are scaling up their risk-based CDM strategies to respond to COVID, essentially pushing the boundaries for teams and organizations to focus on what matters, what data matters, i.e. the critical data, and applying those, again, the word that I know we use quite a bit, at least the panelists here, applying fit-for-purpose strategies to manage what needs to get managed in terms of data. So I guess the question I wanted to just pose to the panelists here, have you observed, again, it's through COVID or recent changes in people's thinking of collecting what's truly needed going forward, and what's your experience? I know we keep talking about this basic thing. You collect what you're going to analyze. If you collect unnecessary thing, you're going to have to obviously clean and put it in your DMPs and whatnot to see what you did. But are you observing some shifting in people's thinking about COVID-19, the focus on risk-based and what matters? And we'll start with you first, Patrick, and then we'll go to Mikhail and then Dimitri.
Okay, yes, we're seeing a change. I think in our organization, I'll be honest, I'm not seeing a change as much on what to collect and how much to collect yet. I think people are more pragmatic, but not to the extent we would have anticipated. I'm seeing a big shift on what to clean, how to clean, and a lot more flexibility on the modalities around how to clean. Before, we would not collect eCoin, BYOD, web, on the phone. Now people are open to multi-modalities on how to collect things. So I'm seeing a huge shift on the what to clean and how to collect. More pragmatism, to use Mikhail's wording, on how much to collect, but not that big shift yet, to be honest with you.
Right.
At this stage. I'm not sure if you're seeing that the same, Dimitri.
No, I can go first if you want to. So I think what needs to be stated here, and it might be the obvious, is of course all studies and therapeutic areas are different. So I could think about therapeutic areas and studies where a virtual approach could be very difficult, almost impossible, where you do need the direct interaction with an investigator at a clinical site. But again, that should not be used by any organization that for those therapeutic areas or those data collection domains where a virtual component makes sense, that they should be disregarded that. So, and maybe this is where we as SCDM, as a society and industry leaders can provide maybe some guidance out there in terms of what kind of studies, what kind of settings would be more prone to go one way or the other on those ones. So that's good. One thing, and maybe slightly controversial, because not to my surprise, we're agreeing a lot on this panel, but maybe I'm throwing something to Patrick, you, Sanjay, and Dimitris. Old school thinking, and an easy answer would be obviously collect what you need for your safety and efficacy. So really focus, don't put too much noise around it. Absolutely. However, we also have to have in mind that there's a lot of discussion on AI, machine learning, and that more old school thinking, of course, came when data storage, getting volumes of data in, was a huge issue. And again, I'm clearly not advocating here to collect everything you can, but let's also acknowledge that studies do get more complicated. Studies cost a ton of money. If you can get certain secondary and tertiary endpoints into a study to maybe prevent another study, and getting certain signals, especially on the safety side, is something that we should look into, again, especially where data storage isn't an issue so much anymore. And we do have very sophisticated tools now to get to tons of data. I'm not advocating to getting your vital signs every 2 seconds sent to the cloud and then see what you do with it. But I could imagine other scenarios where maybe more is better, because you can pick up the 1 in 10,000 event there. And that's something that we also have some responsibility with to pick up on. So I'm definitely interested in Patrick's, yours, Andres, and Dimitris' take on that, and hopefully it's not too controversial.
Well, I mean,
Dimitri.
Yeah. I think there's there's multiple points there. I don't think any of us would say, if it's in the planned analysis, and argue less in the SAP. I think the point is, and the point that I always tell my team where they're in study teams having these discussions, is it's not a matter of this generic preferences. It's a matter of what's in the statistical analysis plan, what's in the protocol. So if you want a tertiary analysis, put it in the SAP in the protocol. I think the concern comes when there's superfluous data, quote unquote supportive, that may or may not be so supportive directly, or to the example you gave, physicals and vitals at every visit. Why? And that's not to say that you may not even want the site to do it. It's to say, but does it need to be collected? And I think that's got to adhere to what the protocol sets for and what the statistical analysis plan calls for. Absolutely, we can do more, we can take more, but keep in mind that also affects the site, it also affects the patient, right? Exactly. Memory now, I mean, I can just get cloud servers, to great volumes, but everything I'm collecting means the site had to do some procedure and the patient had to experience that procedure. There's got to be a purpose and a driver for it. But I understand your point in the sense of, does it really need, do we need to be, every little thing pushed back, as opposed to say, well, you know what, there might be something here that we could detect. With regard to the modalities, though, that Patrick mentioned earlier, I do want to pose a word of warning, though, in the sense of, you can look at something and say, we validated these instruments to be equivalent. So a form, a web page, and an app, right? And we validated them all to be equivalent. We did a study. We showed that people in bad moods showed there were all the equally bad moods in all of them, and in equally good moods in all of them. The problem is, though, when you put it in the real world and you simultaneously use all that mixture, you're now varying contemporaneousness between the modalities. So I think even though technically it's feasible, I think teams have to really think about where it makes sense to allow those flexibilities back and forth.
Absolutely.
And it may not. Yeah.
That makes total sense.
No,
you don't want to yes, you don't want to open the floodgate to every possible modalities and solution. I think to me it needs to be a fit for purpose. You don't use just because you want to use it. You need at the end of the day ensuring that your data is comparable across modalities. So you need to do a risk-based assessment from the beginning on what is suitable and what is not suitable for that. I think, like you, when it comes to your question, Michael, and your provocating question about collecting more, I'm the one, less is always better. And like Dimitri, I'm always pushing back on teams. If it's not in the protocol, and even if it's per regulation, you don't collect beyond the protocol requirement. If you want something, it has to be in the construct of your protocol. And it might be TA specific. So at the now, we have studies on medical aesthetics. So you don't need to collect a ton of data and burden the site on that. When you have a study on depression, maybe it may be more relevant to collect a tiny bit more. And maybe to your point, prevent a study. So it's all about going to the risk-based approach, is try to tailor to what you need and not try to have a one-size-fits-all strategy across.
But Patrick, you just triggered a memory I have to share with you and the audience when you said depression scales. The reason I mentioned the thing about that mixing modalities early on in my career, when interactive voice recognitions, you remember when they were first new, and we all had landlines. So a company I worked for had the bright idea of doing a 27-question depression scale via telephone. If you did not start depressed on the 27th question, you were always depressed.
Yeah.
True. That's So I guess, I mean, at the end of the day, the pragmatism and the statistical analysis plan driving what you're going to need for the analysis. I think Mikhail's point is, now with these variables, we are able to collect more, and there are not as many limitations of somebody manually reviewing line by line. I think we can apply some AI ML pieces, but the fundamentals of what are you doing the study for, and if there are, I think, again, to your point, Dimitri and Mikhail, if there are some tertiary endpoints, let's just, I mean, I didn't mean this question as it's black and white, right? As there is a shade of gray there, and I think,
and Sanjay, what I would add, be careful what you wish for. So let's say if you collect vital on sensor every millisecond, and if a patient has a safety signal in the middle of the night, how do you monitor that, right? You have to make sure that if you collect more, you're responsible for more too. And I think, to me, you have to be careful. Patient safety is always the most important thing. So you have to make sure when you collect more, you can control that more. Because at the end of the day, if you miss something and the patient has an SE or dies from it, it's a big deal. So I think with more data comes more responsibility too. It's not just a matter of using AI, NLP to analyze it. You really have that accountability, responsibility to manage that big volume of data. So I think I would, again, to your point, Michael, it's a good idea. We have just to remain pragmatic on how much, and it depends on the situation. That's it.
Okay, so let's move the conversation, if I can, to the issue of missingness, right? So COVID-19, obviously, we had a ton of missed visits, missed procedures, patients aren't coming to the clinics, and a really rapid increase in missed data. And now teams are obviously teasing out as this data is missing, and they're doing, in many cases, I know in my company, we're doing this risk assessment on a weekly basis to see where some of these things are. We are teasing out the overall impact on the study due to what's missing. And there are backup and contingencies that have been developed due to COVID-19 in terms of how do we minimize the amount of data that's going to be missing. And I think we touched slightly on, allowing other modalities where the data could come in, not necessarily just from the patients, but also from the sites. So the question, I think, Mikhail, I wanted to just pose to you, given your organization is in a unique spot to compare and contrast within your client base, what backup mechanism, as you saw COVID-19 coming up, and in terms of risk management of missing and what's important and what cannot be missing, or we should minimize the missingness there. What backup mechanism you saw that you had to resort to collect some of this data that would perceive to be, or that was going to be missing if you didn't apply those strategies?
So a couple of things happened. As you can imagine, as an organization, we had a rapid COVID response team together, cross-functional, I should say. This goes obviously beyond clinical data management, to formulate our company's position when engaging with clients. And we found a full spectrum where there were clients that had a similar task force, and we would come to the same approach and say, great, we implement it. We had cases where the two approaches would not be on the same page, and then we would discuss. And truth be told, sometimes we would learn from the client approach, sometimes the other way around. So what I'm hinting to is also, again, is it depended on the study what could be done. As an example, if we had an ongoing study where there was a mobile device already part of the study, to then tack onto that existing platform, certain other questions that could then be done remotely was relatively straightforward. Obviously, there's a question, why didn't you go from the beginning with that approach? So why did you force a subject going into the study into the site for those kinds of assessment? We had those ones. There was a brute force ones where you add your page and your checkbox and had to collecting if missed data were COVID related, and you would go the protocol deviation route for those ones. Again, nothing sophisticated, but just from a documentation point of view, making sure that you are robust from those ones. So that was honestly the main approaches. So when possible, depending on the indication, therapeutic area, study, and sponsor company, is again, good thing is be able to tap into existing technology. We didn't have to go out and source technology. We had that at our fingertips and we used it. And that was possible to then, again, for the right study, for the right client, for the right therapeutic area, to turn around pretty quickly to fill as much as we could the gaps in data collection. And I think that for many studies, we filled that gap. Is that ideal? Needed to be documented? Was there extra effort? Absolutely. But much better to put that effort in than having a whole study go to waste and extending enrollment period. So that's, again, still going on, but we had some responses in place.
Great. Okay, I'm in the interest of time, and I know more questions have come up, and I wanted to take time to acknowledge and answer those questions. And let's move on to how we build the future together. How do we learn and adapt from COVID-19? What expectations so if we can move on to the next slide, Rafin. Yes. So I think now it's more of a crystal balling. And I wanted to share other McKinsey data. McKinsey recently conducted a poll of about 250 PIs across therapy areas, and they asked them the share of interactions they conduct with their patients and with their sponsors pre-COVID, at the peak of COVID in their respective sites, and post-COVID. And some interesting, they're not surprising, I think, insights came out of it. So if you look at the level of remote interactions with patients and sponsors, increased with the severity of the situation, obviously. And at the crisis peak, you would see more than 85% of the sponsors' interactions were done using a remote engagement method. More than half of patients' interactions were remote. And a share of these interactions is expected to obviously drop as patients would be able to go back to their sites. But what they're finding from the PI's perspective is it's still going to remain at 3 times and 2 times more than it was pre-COVID for patients and the sponsors respectively. So let's bring this topic closer to home, and let's take another poll of how our audience think the future of the future after COVID would look like for data management. So can we take another poll? So just read and respond to this question. As a result of COVID-19, you anticipate A, protocols will allow for more data that's going to be collected remotely. Telehealth will be very common. C, CDMs will be managing novel data streams. There were some questions about, how do you collect imaging, when patients are remote. So I think we'll touch on that slightly when we get to the Q&A. and D, analytics. As more data comes in, analytics will emerge as a major data management competency, or none of the above. So let's take maybe 30 seconds and people respond, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, I think we should be able to close it now. Okay, let's see the results. Okay. Yeah, I guess in a way, all of the above, right? So allowing for more data to be collected remotely. I mean, we are starting to see even now, while there are protocols that are being authored, they're going to start, sometime later in this year, they are adopting remote technology. So I think 3/4 of you are saying that's what you are seeing, and you are also anticipating that to be the case. And again, supporting that would be telehealth. And yeah, I mean, I think any reactions to this poll panel? Anybody?
Just item D a little bit. And maybe it's just the way people perceive it, right? Whether it's the same role or additional roles within the DM function or capability of an organization. But personally, I'm a little surprised it's that low, even though it's still more than 50%. But no big surprises.
No, likewise, no big surprise either. Yeah.
So when I and Mikhail, anything from you before I dive in?
I would agree with Dimitris. I would have expected D higher. Encouraged that E is so low, which means the majority see that change is coming, and all of the above, I think, are in a positive trend. So I interpret the low 3% as definitely something positive and expected, but maybe not that low. So it's great to see.
You know what? I'm wondering if people already did. I'm wondering if people believe they already have an analytic strategy and it's already there. Why it's not going to be new? It could explain to why lower.
It could be. Yes. So very quickly, I've thought about two questions that I wanted to ask. So one is, I think, and you guys were touching on the role. And the role of clinical data management as a discipline evolving into, I think our white papers from an SCDM have been talking about evolving into what we call the clinical data science, not necessarily just naming the organization as such, but performing and looking at the data differently. So the question I think I have for Patrick is, I know the Innovation Committee has been busy authoring our next paper on the role of data manager. Do you see the current pandemic impacting the journey from CDM to CDS, both positively? I know we talked about risk management, one of the cornerstones, as well as negatively. Any reaction that you see looking at it from the CDM to CDS journey from a data management role perspective?
No, I think as we said during this webinar, we expect an acceleration of the adoption of clinical data science practices and technologies in general. It's obvious that the one-size-fits-all CDM approach with traditional EDC is over, and we'll see that accelerating for sure on all the competencies and soft skills required to handle more complex data streams in different protocol design, using more centralized data review, applying risk-based approach, we need to change dramatically in the next couple of months, not in the next couple of years. So I only see a positive acceleration of our journey. And from what we are seeing with COVID-19, there is nothing what we did not think would be a good idea to do. I mean that evolution is totally in line with what we thought would happen eventually. It's just being accelerated at a much faster pace. So I think it's exciting for us in general. And as I said, we see a shift from on-site monitoring to centralized monitoring. A lot will be data-driven. On the negative side, I would say it's not really about the journey to CDS. It's really, we have been adopting so much so fast. So I think once that's over, we're going to have to step back and think about it. We did not have necessarily, as an example, the right intelligent clinical data management system to integrate, aggregate all of that data into one place. So I think there would be learning to be taken from at the end of the day, but it's totally in line with that journey, I would say. That's Sanjay.
Yeah.
Sanjay, can I add to this? Because I have to add on this one, because it speaks to the role of the lead data manager. And one pattern that I've seen, and again, not with current clients or current company, just in general, that when you think about a mobile health technology, an e-sports technology, a virtual environment, I've seen approaches where data management is being cut out. You have a technology provider that goes out to a group of clinical folks, regulatory folks, a company, and a picture is being painted how data can be collected easily, let's say directly from a patient. It comes in, and because it's e-source, it's clean, and I'm doing air quotes here around it. And where's the data management need here? And we have seen a similar issue years back with the whole transition to EDC, where was the data management needed back then? Sometimes the argument was made. And I think there is definitely a risk, and not just being a true blood data manager and moving towards data scientist, the whole concept of data integration, how data is being collected, adherence to protocol, making sure ready for the SAP, things that we talked already. I do see in some organization that it's being pushed aside. And again, as a society, as experts, as industry leaders, we have to make sure that we show, I don't want to say the value, that would be too simply put, the risk of taking it too lightly, not serious enough to make sure that we adhere to protocol, that data is being collected the right way, the most efficient way, that we don't have superfluous integrations between systems, that reconciliation is happening. And just because you're collecting e-source from different sources, let's say, does not take away a need with somebody with a data management technology, data integrity mind to look at it. I know that I'm preaching to the choir to this panel here.
Yeah.
But we have to continue to push for it. I'm sure in your organization this might not happen, but being exposed to many organizations, I see that bubbling up, and we have to be careful around it.
I think the thing that maybe we're doing a little bit of a disservice with this whole DM to CDS thing, because it's not really an academic data scientist type of role we're talking about, right?
Right. Right.
If you pulled in an academic data sentist, they could do all kinds of analytics for you. But would they know how to read a protocol and identify the best data capture method? Would they know how to, there's a lot of other aspects. So really, I think what it really is something new, right? The traditional data manager role now incorporating into itself some specific fit for purpose data sciences capabilities and knowledge. And we see it, Sanjay, to go back to your original question, I think it's happening and it's accelerating because before this, data managers went to their study team meetings, and what did the data manager have to tell the study team? How much of my data is in? How clean is it? How many queries are pending?
Yeah, exactly.
Did I get my third-party load? Now the data managers go to the team is saying, how much is Mr. missing? What are we missing enough that the patient may not be unavailable? And so they're asking the data managers more complicated questions. Data managers are having to think a little more, collaborate more with their statistics partners, do a little more unique filtering to get down to, because sometimes knowing if it's missed or simply missing is not as simple as that simple at all. And knowing that can mean the difference between whether or not you have an evaluable subject or not. So I think the study teams are demanding of us more than the traditional DM role.
No, I totally agree with you, Dimitri. And we're seeing the exact same, actually. I think the team is reaching out more to clinical data management than they ever did before for those exact reasons. And when we moved on the risk assessment for the clinical studies, it's moving from a risk-based on-site monitoring RBM model to a study holistic risk-based model where data management has to assess the impact of the protocol, the impact of the technologies, modalities on what the impact on the reliability of the clinical trial results. So it's more complex, more holistic. It's clearly a new role, but as you would say, Michael, is based starting with the core knowledge of data management today on going beyond. So I think we need to leverage what we have on expand, on self-learning curve is accelerated. It's going to be quite steep. It will require more technical knowledge in some extent. As you said, more, you need to be able to grasp how to integrate, collect data of different kinds. So you don't clean e-source or real world data like you clean EDC data. So it's really a new discipline, starting with the core of what we have today, I think.
Yeah. So I would just maybe move to take on some questions now, but I would just maybe give an example of how my team at AbbVie now manages some of this expectation or the changing expectation of my data management lead from their study teams. So we have a construct of our centralized monitoring, and we have adopted something called data review meetings. It's not what it says. It's not that that's where the data review happens. But this is a place where data management lead brings the right people together, the monitoring, the clinical development, the biostatistics, the stat programming individuals, and of course themselves, and safety, and then shares with them what they're seeing in the data, what they're seeing from a trending perspective. So we have in our data review plan some sets of standard trends that we would monitor, the data management would monitor, and we would share with them. And then similarly, we would ask whether it's actionable or not, and we would record those in our action log. But there are things such as, going back 10 years, 15 years, to Dimitri's point, it would be the clinical data manager person would bring the status of the cleanliness of the database. How many queries are outstanding, how many queries are pending, what's the state of medical coding looks like. So I think it's definitely changed, and much more so, I think, with a higher degree of speed in the last 3 years, I would say 3 to 5 years, definitely. So I do want to move on. I know we've got about 10 minutes for some questions that have come up so far, and I know we've addressed some of them. But I would pose this question. The first one, I think it was pretty simple. I think for Dimitri, the example you mentioned on having EDC UAT done within a couple of days of protocol, was the database built in-house or by a CRO? I guess it was done by a clinical data management person, wherever they sit. But do you want to take it on?
And not that a partner couldn't have done it. I want to preface that. Not that a partner couldn't have done it, but it was done by an in-house team that I'm very proud of.
Great. The other question, I think Robin, by the way, the prior question was from, I may be pronouncing your name wrong, so my apologies, but YU asked that question to Dimitri, and the next question is from Robin. I think Robin's comment is, the D in the audience poll was low because DM already has so much to do and can do more, right? And I think more involvement from data analytics. And I think she's definitely touching on something that I know as leaders you face in terms of resourcing and how much more can DM do, because there is an expectation, as I was explaining through our centralized monitoring bits within AbbVie Allergan, that there is a lot that even I'm asking my lead DMs to do, and how much more can they take on before they break. So I think it's perhaps a resourcing question. So I think the one comment she makes is more in. Sorry, Patrick, just maybe let me mention this. More involvement in data analytics would be great, but not resource to allow this. So I think she just said that in her next point. So go on, Patrick. Sorry.
No, maybe Dimitri can weigh in. And I think one thing we didn't touch on is really the evolution of AI and automations. We don't expect everything to be done the same way. So I know, Dimitri, you did a hackathon to use machine learning to automate manual review. And we expect some of those analytics and solutions to enable data management to focus more on the value add activities, on automate some of the tedious repetitive. So to your point, we don't have to include resources.
Yeah, I would actually disagree with the comment that we don't have we're not resourced to the analytics. The whole point of the analytics would be to need less manual scrubbing and reviewing. If it's not accomplishing that, then you need to rethink if you're focusing on the right use cases for your automations and your analytics. But we certainly are seeing a significant impact on the initial one that we're piloting right now, and its ability. It's absolutely astounding. This thing is learning, and we're teaching it, and it is learning. And with each week that goes by, it becomes more and more accurate in not only predicting a discrepancy, but even recommending language to accompany the query. This is, if we were able to do this in 6 months, I can only imagine where the industry is going to be a few years from now. It's moving fast.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff. I think a lot of this stuff around the machine learning and NLP. I think some of the use cases around how we reconcile AE with ConMeds and with medical history, for example. I think those 3 domains require a ton of really manual sort of review, and I think this is kind of prime sorts of use cases. Obviously, it as it learns, and I know Dimitri, you were sharing an example with me in our prior chat, that it is finding things that a human wouldn't even be looking, right? Even stating that you may want to look at here, not here. So definitely something to do as something there. My friend Amy asked a question. I think I don't think she's online anymore, but she said, Amy Mayer said, database rules were accelerated, as Dimitri, you had mentioned, due to COVID. But does the group feel that the days instead of weeks were built is going to be, I guess, in terms of in her way, the new normal for the studies, or is it too aggressive to keep up with?
Well, that specific scenario was too aggressive to keep up. There was no question. Yeah. But in classic pharma fashion, we spent the last month and a half root causing how we perform so well, or in some cases this is the reverse, of course, root causes. But no, there's definitely something there's definitely something there. Obviously, it's the iterative prototyping in the build versus waiting until you have a final protocol. There's no question. It's not the first time anybody's done it, and it won't be the last time anybody's done it. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement using some of these examples. Like I said earlier, a bit more pragmatic than thinking it's going to be like that, because we really don't need to be like that, because the entire environment can't be like that. You're not going to produce IP, and you're not going to get every ethical committee in the world and IRB committee in the world to agree to it in a day. Remember, you have to submit your protocols to these people. So this was a unique scenario where the whole community, us, our sites, the regulators, work together to make it happen. It is not a preface to what's to come in a day, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity there to dramatically reduce and accelerate the development time, because when you look at your metrics in any organization, and I've seen them from 4 or 5 major companies that I've worked for, not that I've moved around that much, but because of acquisitions, but I've seen it for 4 or 5 companies, and when you look at the detailed metrics and you analyze it, the variability is not in the build. The variability is in the specs. If you lock down the specs, you can consistently build and test a study in a couple of weeks. It's maybe even faster, maybe even 1 week. But it's the specs that really are that give you the big variability in that whole database setup process. Look at all your metrics and look at the standard deviation for each step, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Sanjay, I wanted to get in 2 quick comments on this one. First of all, I have achieved my goal. All 3 of you use the word pragmatic today, so that's great. My more serious topic here is the whole point in terms of eSource, the more sophisticated tools to build the mobile health platform, the bring your own devices. Yes, we're able to build it now very quickly, but even if it was to take a few more weeks, the key benefit is, of course, the enrollment curves. So I wouldn't mind even to spend an extra 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever number of weeks in the build-up. But if you can really enroll much quicker, because your outreach, it's not just patients who are willing to come to a site, but patients that are willing to go on an investigative trial, obviously you're going to save months, if not more, in terms of enrollment curves, the right patients,
Yes.
and doing that one here. So that's a good investment to have. If we can make it quicker, sure. But enrollment is a key driver here in terms of key savings for companies and acceleration.
Yeah, Miguel, it's one of the biggest flaws of the industry is this focus on first subject, first visit. It's last subject, first visit that should be the focus, not first subject, first visit.
Yeah.
Yep. So very quickly I want to cover as many questions as we can, and maybe still leave a minute to wrap this thing up. Rayad, Ramda, I think we try to answer this question through the other response you got. I think going back to normal after the COVID-19 is done in terms of the crunch in database build time, or the record speed with which some of these companies are doing. So hopefully we were able to touch on it. I guess there is a question Kimberly asked. He's doing this service speaking, mispronouncing her last name, but I think she's, I don't know if she's on, but she was saying, I think at smaller CROs and pharma companies, because of the business model and the processes those smaller companies have with less paperwork and they still pass FDA standard, has COVID-19 shown the bigger CROs and biopharma companies that having that many SOPs and that many people having to sign off on a task can be a time waster. So I guess, I mean, she's saying there is learnings that we've all had, again, within the confinements of our own companies, but learnings from other partners, especially, you know, in the COVID-19 studies. I know bigger companies and the smaller companies are partnering pretty well together. So I guess the answer to that question, Kim, is yeah, learnings are everywhere, and obviously there will be learnings even for us to see what steps in our SOPs now going through this build time in such a short period of time, and the iterative development process approach that Dimitri talked about. Okay, I'm going to spare you with that question. This is Grace Cow asked a question for wearables. What are the different approaches that the data management would be doing in terms of data collection and data cleaning? How do the current EDC system handle large quantities coming from wearables? So Patrick, you wanna attack that? EDC and data ingestion into EDC from wearables. I know you talked about intelligent CDMS, so something to mention there.
Yeah, so maybe what I would say is EDC is not meant to be a central place to load everything in the first place. On large volume of data, especially sensor and wearable, EDC is the right place to load it anyway. So first of all, EDC is meant to collect clean data, do SDV. So if you load sensor data, you're not going to SDV, you're not going to eSource, you're not going to query. So it does not make sense necessarily to load all of that eSource external data into the first feed that into EDC. And when it comes to that large volume of data, I think as we highlighted, if you collect wearable every second, maybe on your pulse, you will end up with millions and millions of records. So you need to change your analytics on data review to identify trends and signals, and you're not going to do record by record data review. So try to be pragmatic again, Michael, not using EDC as your CDR, I would say clinical data repository, but look at different ways to aggregate, collect what we call sequence data outside, and using intelligent CDMS.
Okay. Well, with that, gentlemen, I think we are coming to the close of this webinar, but let's move to the next slide. I think there is something I wanted to just make sure that I touch on. So SCDM for 2020, you guys all have seen, is happening virtually this year, and registrations are going to open pretty soon. I have really enjoyed today's conversation, so please note down the date and where we are having. It's going to be virtual conference. No longer you need to travel and the airports and whatnot, but we are trying to, from an SCDM board perspective, we are trying to ensure the experience of our audience is as robust as it can be, given it's going to be virtual. But the registration is going to open pretty soon. People, if you're wondering about the pricing around this is not going to be the same price that you pay. So I think you would be able to and perhaps many more people to this event. But you saw today the kind of conversation, the kind of leadership level of engagement that we have here at SCDM and with people who support this organization. I have today really enjoyed chatting with all three of you, and I really appreciate the time the three of you spared for us. Any last parting words you may have, and I'll just go through a round robin quickly, and then we'll bring it to a closure. So let's start with you, Mikhail, and also as a chair of SCDM, anything you want to mention on our upcoming conference?
Quick one, and Sanjay, as you know, as part of the board, I remember that beginning of the year when COVID coming out, I was like thinking what a year to be a chair, and a little bit down when we made the decision to go virtual. I've changed my mind completely, and again, outreach and inviting everybody to our virtual conference in September, not in person in San Antonio as originally planned. And why I'm changed my mind, it is what a year to be a clinical data manager being in our industry. If there was a year that humanity, people, our society needed us to drive something, to make a change, this is a year, this is our calling. So I don't care if you're a 1-year experienced data manager or a 4 decades veteran like Dimitri is. Sorry, side pun, he's not that old. So please come. We need your input. We need your guidance, your thought leadership, your questions, and guiding us. So it's going to be a great conference. We have started our preparations more than a month ago when we decided to go virtual. And for the next months up to the date, we're going to prepare great content for everybody and hope it will be an interactive discussion as we had this one here. Sanjay, thank you to you and to Patrick and Dimitris as well.
Patrick, any last parting words?
No, thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Mikhail and Dimitris. I think the future for CDM was already bright, and it's going to be even brighter moving forward. There will be, as we said, a lot of opportunities for everybody. So we'll cover a lot of that during the SCDM conference. So all come in number. You won't be disappointed.
The future is so bright that you're going to need glasses. Dimitri?
I don't have any.
Just one final sentence. I think I've never seen a better opportunity for DM to truly contribute and make a difference than what's happening around us right now. And it's up to us to make sure that science will win, because it always does.
Yes, yes. All 2 sides, 2 clinical data management. Thank you, everybody, for attending to this webinar. Hope you learned and enjoyed the conversation. I tried my best to cover as many questions. And if there are 1 or 2 that we didn't get to, we'll respond one way or the other. Okay. So adios.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.